Hello and good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining me in today's webinar on contractors, consultants and compliance or managing the messy middle. My name is Aneta Gel and I am a Quality Operations and Training Manager at Paul Palmer Limited. I have been in the industry over 25 years, starting in the manufacturing on the packaging lines and working my way through production and onto quality assurance and training where I am today. Today, I would like to talk to you about contractors, consultants and compliance during a pharmaceutical facility build, or as I called it here, managing the messy middle part. If you have any questions or comments as we go along, please put them in the comment section and I will respond to them after the webinar. So I think that's everyone's joined now, so I can start. Many of you may have joined the earlier webinar on GMP project management, where we looked at why pharmaceutical projects so often lose time through the scope movement, delayed decisions and the vendor coordination gaps. And today we are going one level deeper. We are going to focus on what happens when several external organizations are working on the same build, all producing different pieces of the final system, while the regulated company still has to remain clearly in control. This session is not a session about avoiding contractors or consultants. No, because we do need them. Of course, the consultants and the contractors, they bring specialist capability, the capacity and the experience that many organizations do not house internally. The challenge is, however, making sure that the external expertise strengthens the project rather than creating unclear ownership. So over the next 30 minutes, I would like to give you a practical framework for thinking about accountability, the contractor and consultant risk, the governance and the escalation of issues, and what evidence would you need. My aim is that you leave with a few simple questions you can take straight back to your own project. And those questions could be questions like, who owns this particular decision? What evidence do we need? And what happens if something changes? And a very important one, and who must know by when? So what exactly do I mean by the messy middle? So let's define it here for you. At the start of the project, we usually have a reasonable, clear design intent. We have our user requirement specification. We have the approved concepts, the budgets, schedules, and a view of what the facility or the system is meant to do and look like at the end. At the other end of that, we want demonstrated and validated control. We want a facility or utility or equipment item or a computerized system that can reliably support our GMP operations. And the messy middle is the bit or the everything that is in between those two ends. It is the period when design is still being interpreted, the equipment is being selected, and the drawings are changing. The contractors are installing parts of equipment. Suppliers are testing parts of equipment. The consultants are advising, and internal teams are trying to prepare for the qualification and the operational handover of the project. And this is also where the different groups naturally optimize for different things because they have different goals. The project team is watching schedule, the scope, and the cost. The contractors are focusing on completing the work that they have been engaged to deliver. The consultants are focused on their specialist outputs. Quality and validation teams are focused on control, traceability, and evidence. And none of those priorities are wrong, but the risk appears when they are not connected. This links directly to the earlier GMP project and management webinar, where I've talked about how a change can look small in isolation, but become very damaging when several small decisions accumulate. And in the messy middle, that often happens because a practical site decision was made very quickly, perhaps to keep your work moving, because that was thought to be the right thing to do. As long as we keep moving, it is going to be okay. But it is the GMP or the validation impact that will be recognized a lot later, and the true extent of the damage of the issue will come to light. And of course, the regulators, they don't only inspect the finished room or the completed protocol. They inspect the interfaces. They ask who approved the changes, whether the person or people were qualified, whether the effect on the validated state was assessed, and whether the company remained in command of the work at all times. So the central message is really simple here, and that is that outsourced work does not outsource the accountability. So the site still need to be accountable, and they need to have everything under control. Let's have a look at the regulatory anchors here. So there are several regulatory and guidance framework behind this topic, but they all point in a very similar direction. So you have the 21 CFR Part 211 for United States, which establishes the authority of the quality control unit, the requirement for appropriately qualified personnel and consultants, and the expectation for facilities, the sanitation, the maintenance, and the equipment. In European and PICS framework, we have the pharmaceutical quality system requirements in Chapter 1, the personal expectation in Chapter 2, outsourced activities in Chapter 7, and so on and so forth. ICHQ 9 Revision 1 gives us the quality risk management approach, and ICHQ 10 places the outsourced activities firmly within our pharmaceutical quality system. So those of you who have joined earlier sessions on ICHQ 9, quality risk management or quality system will recognize the same principles. The decisions should be based on science, knowledge, and the risk, and management must maintain the oversight of the system as a whole. That is the key principle. Then we've got the WHO guidances that are useful for global programs, particularly around facilities and HVAC systems, and the ASTM E2500, which is the standard guide for specification, design, and verification of pharma and biopharma manufacturing systems, supports a science and risk-based approach to specification, design, and verification. I'm not showing this slide here because I expect anyone to memorize all the references. The practical point is that the contractor control is not a separate project management idea that sits outside a GMP, and that's why I'm trying to show you here. What I'm trying to show is that it's embedded across the quality system, the personnel, the facilities, the data integrity, the validation, and the outsourced activity requirements. So whenever a project decision affects design or configuration, cleanliness, data, or qualification evidence, we should assume there is a GMP connection until we have assessed it properly and confirmed that there isn't. So we need to think it is a GMP until you've assessed it appropriately and you can justify otherwise. Okay, so important message that I have mentioned in my previous webinars and already today is that outsourcing does not outsource the responsibility. I cannot stress this enough. It is the key to make sure that things stay under control. FDA expectations make it clear that the quality unit retains its authority, including for the products manufactured under contract, and the consultant qualifications must be documented. Okay. Again, EU MPIC's guidance requires outsourced activities to be defined, agreed, and controlled through the pharmaceutical quality system, with the contract giver as the person who is outsourcing the work. We stay ultimately responsible, and ICHQ 10 makes the broader systems point. Okay, so it puts the outsourced activity and the purchased materials into your quality system. This should sound familiar to anyone who has attended our sessions of CMO oversight or the supply management or technical agreements, because we cannot simply write a contract and hand the activity over and then assume that the control has transferred. Quality agreement should clarify responsibilities, who is responsible for what, but it does not remove the regulatory responsibility from either party. And then the same principle applies during our build. The cleaning or clean room contractor may be technically responsible for the installation. OEM may execute the factory acceptance testing. A computerized system validation consultant may prepare the validation documents, but the regulated company still has to define the requirements. They still have to approve the important decisions, and they need to understand the evidence, and they decide whether the result is acceptable. I often describe this as the difference between doing the work and owning the decision. External parties may do a great deal of the work for us. They may even be more technically expert than the internal team in a particular specific area. But the company needs named people who understand enough to challenge, approve, reject, or escalate any issues or points. And that is why the message at the bottom of this slide matters very much. It is not anti-contractor and it is not anti-consultant. It is anti-ambiguity, because good external support is extremely valuable, but unmanaged external support is where the risk begins, and it can be really damaging. And the important point to think about that there's one, that not every external party needs the same control. So this is one common mistake, that companies will use the same onboarding and oversight process for every external party. And that tends to create a lot of administration, without necessarily focusing attention on the highest risks. So a general contractor or engineering, procurement, construction management organization may have a major influence over coordination, the drawings, the construction changes and turnover packages. So their main risk may be schedule-driven decisions that will bypass quality review. A clean room or HVAC specialist can directly influence pressure cascades, air movement and contamination control. A utility contractor working on your purified water, WFI, gases or clean steam can affect your hygienic design, the sampling arrangement and maintainability. So consultants also need to be segmented. An independent, aseptic SME or subject matter expert may provide essential challenge, but we should avoid borrowed authority, where everyone treats the consultant's opinion as a decision without a named site owner. A quality systems consultant can accelerate documentation, but the generic procedures that do not match real operations will create a different problem. A regulatory readiness consultant may identify inspection risk, but a polished mock inspection cannot compensate for unresolved controlled gaps. I've been doing some work with the company in the recent weeks on their procedures, and they would say to me, well, we'll do what you say. Well, as someone who is coming to teach or in a consultancy position, well, you don't want to treat that opinion as the main decision, because we are there to provide advice, but we are there to talk and to discuss what would be the best way forward for the company. So let's not treat the consultant's opinion as a decision without any further questions or anything. And this connects to our previous supplier and third-party management topics that I ran a couple of weeks ago, where qualification should be proportionate to GMP criticality. So we should ask ourselves, what can this party change? And what evidence will they generate? Which systems or areas can they access? And what could go wrong if their work is weak? And then how quickly can we detect that? So here I would like to go through where we see the recurring patterns of where projects fail. So here this slide, you've got examples from the public FDA warning letters, and it comes up with the themes where you've got the pattern recognition examples. Okay, they are not here to create a judgment of the companies, because the regulatory status of a company can change later through interaction with the regulators. So this is just to show you an example of the pattern of the issues. So the first pattern is the airflow visualization that doesn't represent real operations. And what it means is that a smoke study can look impressive and on paper, but it will still be weak if it doesn't include the realistic intervention, the equipment position, or the line setup and the movement of the operators when they are in the area. And this is a really useful reminder that a completion of a test is not the same as demonstration of control. The second pattern here you can see is inadequate segregation or poorly defined aseptic area. And these problems often begin early, when the layout decisions are treated mainly as an engineering choices rather than being challenged from the microbiological and operational perspective. And this happens when the experts are not involved in the design setup. Then we have the third pattern, which is the utility remediation that addresses symptoms but not the design. And what that means, so we've covered this in our utilities and root cause analysis training. So what that means, that increasing your sanitization frequency will reduce your excursions temporarily because you're doing more of it, so you're cleaning it. But if your underlying design is flawed, that those excursions, that contamination will keep coming in, and your increased cleaning is not going to solve that problem. Then you have the fourth pattern, that is assumed oversight of a contract laboratory. So the client may believe that the laboratory is qualified and controlled because a contract exists, but there's no active oversight. Nobody manages the method transfer controls. No one reviews any significant events, and there is no data governance. Because remember, your contract laboratory, when they're working on your samples and they create data, that data is yours, or you are responsible for that data. So I'm not going to go through all the examples. I've just kind of focused on a couple of them, but across the 6 elements that you can see there, or the 6 examples here, is the underlying issue is not simply a technical failure. It is a failure of interface management. So the requirements are not clear, the ownership is weak, or the changes are not controlled, or the evidence is accepted without challenge. So what would a good governance model look like in practice? Here you've got a couple of the points to present that to you. So the key is to separate routine delivery decision from the quality critical and strategic decisions, while you're still making sure that the issues can move quickly to the right level. So at the top, you have the executive steering group that deals with the major go or no-go decisions, the significant timeline reset, the major budget or scope impact, and acceptance of enterprise level risk. This group should not be trying to resolve your daily technical details. Okay, they are there, they are the executive steering group, and they're dealing with the major go-no decisions on the huge budget scope enterprise kind of level. The project governance board brings project, engineering, quality, procurement, and operations together for the kind of today called gate decisions and major contractor issues. The quality and compliance forum focuses more closely on deviations, the validation readiness, what's the training status, and the completeness of your documentation and escalation process. Then you could have change control board that will approve changes to design, to configurations, the changes to testing scope or acceptance criteria. A vendor performance review looks at the missed deliverables, CAPAs, evidence turnover, and subcontracting and persistent underperformance. And the work streams lead then manage day-to-day delivery, and they do the early kind of phase issue resolution. And this builds on the governance model from the GMP project management webinar that we have run. And one of the most damaging situation is when every meeting discusses everything, but no meeting has clear decision rights. People talk, actions are recorded, and yet no one is sure who can approve the change or accept the risk, so nothing really happens. And when the next meeting comes, we haven't really moved anywhere. So each governance body therefore needs a defined purpose. They need a membership. They need the frequency, decision authority, and escalation route. It should also be very clear where the quality has approval authority and where quality provides a recommendation to a senior business decision maker. So good governance is not more meetings. You're not going to get good governance if you implement more meetings. A good governance is fewer ambiguous decisions. So if you make decisions, you have an owner, you have one owner for the action that came from that decision. You never give an action to two people because they will think the other person is doing it. So fewer ambiguous decision, clear ownership of your actions, that will make a good governance and make your meetings effective. And then we have the governance that tells us where the decisions sit. And then on the other hand, you've got the escalation matrix that will tell us quickly that an issue, what the issue is, and what to do with it. It is important to have escalation matrix because organizations often rely on personal judgment. Someone sees a problem and thinks it may not be serious and they want to wait for more information, and then it raises it at the next scheduling meeting. And by then, further work may have continued, and now by the time you have in your next scheduling meeting, the issue that was maybe not so big when you discovered it is going to be much larger now. For example, an unapproved change to GMP impacting design should be notified within hours, not saved for a weekly project review. A missing qualification prerequisite needs to reach the project governance board before you have the planned IQ, OQ, and PQ activity and it has proceeded. Or contractor access breach in a controlled area, a supplier-related data integrity concerns, or sterile control failure that requires immediate notifications and containment. Those things cannot wait until your next weekly project governance meeting. And this point links directly to our change control management and deviation training, because the first question is not always what is the fault root cause. At the start, the priority is often what happened and what is the what's potentially affected, what must stop, and what evidence must be preserved, and who gives the authority what to do next. A useful escalation matrix will name the trigger, the initial owner, the notification time, the decision body, and the escalation time, and the minimum evidence that you will require. And of course, this should be agreed before the execution starts, and then it is embedded into your contract, into your meeting terms, and into your issue logs. The matrix also needs to work outside your normal office hours. If the procedure only works when the QA lead is available 9 to 5, then it's not quite a robust escalation process. So, but the point is, or the aim of the matrix is that you don't escalate everything to senior leadership. The aim is to make sure that high impact issues do not remain at the level of the person who first notices them. So the aim is that the high impact is escalated at the right time to the right people. So what would risk register look like in practice? A useful risk statement when you're looking at or you're setting up a risk register follows a format where you start if, then, because. So I have an example here for you to make it tangible. Is if HVAC balancing is changed late without an approved impact review, then clean room qualification may no longer represent the installed state. And now we're going why, the because. Because airflow, behavior, and pressure cascades may have shifted. So you have your if something changes, then that has an impact on something. So, and why is that impact? Because this and that will be different. And this statement is much more useful than writing in your risk register, HVAC is a high risk. Because it explains the event, the consequence, and the reason. We can then assign the life cycle phase, the GMP impact, the owner, the triggers, and the mitigation and the escalation threshold if we identify that that is what the risk is, instead of just saying that HVAC is high risk. And this is consistent with the quality risk management approach that is discussed in ICHQ 9, the latest revision. The scoring method matters less than the quality of the thinking applied. A beautifully calculated risk priority number is not really useful if the risk statement is vague or the control is not real. And what I also want to emphasize here is the leading indicators. So a lagging indicator, as we know, tells us the risk that has already materialized. Okay, this is something that has happened because it's lagging. For example, a failed smoke study or microbial excursion. A leading indicator, on the other hand, tells us the risk is developing. So perhaps a balancing request after site acceptance testing, repeated incomplete turnover documents, unresolved FAT exceptions, or a vendor asking to retain unrestricted administrator access. So these are leading indicators, and your register should contain those named leading indicators and a clear escalation threshold. It should also state what evidence you would require before that risk can be closed. Saying the action is completed is really not enough, because it doesn't tell you what the action was and what's the evidence that the control is implemented and it's appropriate and it's effective. And like any risk register, of course, we should review it frequently at relevant governance meetings. Because you've created at the beginning, it doesn't mean that it stays as it is. It is a live document and it needs to be reviewed frequently. A risk that is recorded but never used to support a decision is only documentation, not a real management of a risk. So the final layer here is the documentation architecture. So governance expectations need to appear consistently across the commercial contract, the quality agreement, the statement of work, and the internal procedures. And this connects directly to our topic on technical agreement and supplier oversight. A quality agreement should not simply just repeat the GMP generic language. It should describe who does what, who approves what, how information moves from one party to another, and what happens when something goes wrong. And that needs to be specific in your quality agreement with your contractors, with your subcontractors, and even with the consultants. For a build, what I would expect is a clear responsibility matrix for all GMP relevant activities. Consultant qualifications and any conflicts of interest should be reviewed before any work begins. Subcontracting of a GMP relevant activities should require a prior approval, with the same controls flowing down to the subcontractors. And the change notification is very important, and the times that you put in need to be explicit. If a supplier makes an unapproved design or configuration change, notify promptly is too vague. Promptly, we don't know what that means, and it means completely different time frame to everyone else. You need to have specific, explicit time frames for your notification, and the agreements should define the time expectations and the information required. It might not seem like very important at the beginning, but it is very important when you have issues and you go in trying to find out when they were supposed to let you know, and your information is vague. You have nothing to kind of argue with. Audit rights should cover the contractor and the relevant subcontractors, including the records, the training, the data controls, deviations, and CAPAs. Because the turnover clause is very important. Mechanical completion is not a GMP handover, because the system may be physically installed and running, but it's not ready for the GMP work. Internal SOPs need to explain how the company manages the requirements. Okay, who qualifies the external parties, who approves access, who reviews the deliverables. And the documents should reinforce one another. They should link to each other. When the contract says one thing, the quality agreement says another, and the SOP is silent, you've got the messy middle that becomes even messier. So we are coming to the end of today's session. So let me bring it into 5 manageable points for you to take away with you today. So the first one, accountability never transfers. Work can be outsourced, but the regulated company must remain able to understand, challenge, and approve the outcome. Second takeaway, segment external parties by GMP criticality. Focus the strongest controls on the parties who can affect product quality, sterility, data integrity, validation, evidence, or the overall maintained state of the facility. The third one is govern the interfaces, not just the deliverables. Many failures will occur between the design and the test, and between the vendor and the site, or between the mechanical completion and GMP handover. So govern your interfaces between different areas, because they are where your gaps will appear. A fourth takeaway for today is escalate on defined triggers and timeframes rather than on your instinct. People should not have to decide from scratch whether an issue is serious enough to raise. They should have triggers. They should have the tools to guide them to make a decision, rather than having to think on their instinct. And the fifth takeaway for today is evidence is stronger than your retrospective rationalization. As we discussed in the process validation or change control and data integrity sessions earlier in the year, we need contemporaneous and traceable evidence that the requirement was understood, the decision was controlled, and the results were acceptable. So a useful question to take away today for you is, if the key contractor or consultant left the project tomorrow, would the company still understand the decisions, the current risks, the open expectations, and the evidence needed from the handover? That is a really good question that I would like to leave you with, because that answer to that question will tell you how messy your middle potentially is. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me today. I hope this has made the messy middle feel a little less messy, or it helps you understand how to manage it. Contractors and consultants are essential to most pharmaceutical builds, but the value here comes from combining their expertise with a clear internal ownership, proportionate oversight, and disciplined evidence. So please take that away. Don't leave contractors and consultants just running around. It needs to be there needs to be oversight and ownership from your side. Please, as I said at the beginning, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section and I will respond to them after the webinar. If you are interested in any other trainings or anything related to this, please have a look at our website, Academy of Pharmaceuticals, where we do have courses related to this topic, like GMP project management, change control, process validation, and we can provide webinars or training on that. So please do have a look, or contact me directly on anetagel@pqs.ltd. Thank you again for your time today, and I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you and bye-bye.